Hi, welcome to Project Geospatial. I'm Adam Simmons, and we have a special episode today as we talk with Bill Emison. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, sir.
And you are the conference chair for the International LiDAR Mapping Forum. Is that correct?
That is right. Yes, sir.
Awesome. Well, give us an introduction of who you are, what you do, and let's get started with what the LiDAR Mapping Forum is.
Okay. Well, again, my name is Bill Emison. I'm the conference chair for this year will be the 2020 will be our 20th anniversary of the International LiDAR Mapping Forum. And that's going to take place from March 23rd through the 25th in Washington, D.C. at the Convention Center there in Washington, D.C. So basically, ILMF is a show about all things involving commercial LiDAR and its applications. So like I said, when I started to come to the show in 2006 as an attendee and as an exhibitor. In my previous life, I had worked for a company that had collected airborne LiDAR. And so began to go to the show and exhibit there and work the show. And early on saw a lot of value as well as a lot of opportunities in LiDAR. And now almost 15, 16 years later, it's the industry is growing faster than I can imagine. And the applications, especially on the commercial side, are absolutely exploding. So it's a really exciting time to be there. And we're super excited about the conference and what we've put together so far.
How big would you say this conference is as compared to last year, for example, from what you've seen?
Right. Well, I expect right now we're tracking about 10% ahead of registrations from 2019 to this year so far. So that's boding well. As it turns out, the International LiDAR Mapping Forum, or usually we just call it ILMF, we've developed an idea using ILMF as kind of the centerpiece to a concept called GeoWeek. So we have invited, one of our partners is the ASPRS.org, which is the American Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. So those are folks that have been doing satellite imaging and remote sensing type of work over the many years. So they've joined us for GeoWeek. So I'm responsible for the ILMF program. ASPRS has their own concurrent separate program in which they offer a lot of good content about remote sensing. And then we're also joined in GeoWeeks by a group called MAPS. And MAPS represents private photogrammetric firms. So these are small commercial firms that collect LiDAR as well as other types of imagery and other types of remote sensing products. So under that one big umbrella, which we call GeoWeek, we have ILMF, ASPRS, and MAPS. So probably more content than any one person can stomach within a 3-day period. But it's a great opportunity to learn about a lot of really new and innovative technologies. It's a great way to network with other professionals in the industry and hear about what they're doing. And also see the latest and greatest on the exhibit hall floor from all the vendors and exhibitors that'll be on hand. We'll have approximately 150 different exhibitors, and we'll have in total about 2,000 folks in attendance. So hopefully we'll break 2,000. We'll see how it counts out, but we're excited about the show. And
now, just to clarify, is this 2,000 for the entire GeoWeek group, or yes, for ILMF specifically?
Yeah, that's everybody all put together.
Okay.
I mean, of course you can slice it and dice it any, 100 different ways, but overall we expect about 2,000 folks there.
That's a pretty good turnout either way.
Yeah, it is. And it's pretty consistent. We've been growing it over the last several years. Like I said, when I started coming to the show in 2006, I mean, there was probably a couple hundred, 300, 400 people there max, but the industry was tiny. And, 15 years later, the industry has exploded, and now, especially with the use of autonomous technologies as well as autonomous navigation within cars and vehicles, LiDAR is becoming a very, very popular technology. So I think.
Well, that was going to be my next question: is what
technology
or what innovations have you seen carry LiDAR to make it so popular in the last couple of years compared to the previous 10?
Well, I think it's a convergence of many different factors. First and foremost is that the sensor technology, the hardware is getting cheaper and better. And that's, as computing power gets better, the hardware gets better. How it works, how it's utilized, how it's operated is improving quite quickly. In terms of LiDAR, some of the innovations we're seeing are kind of extensions of the technology, i.e., back in 2006, there was literally one wavelength that was applied to all LiDAR systems, and that was typically referred to as 1064, 1064 nanometers. Or 1.064 nanometers. I can't remember which one it is, but a very small distance. And so that was the only option you had. If you want to do LiDAR, it was at that wavelength. Now you're seeing different wavelengths utilized depending on the application. So there's some that are shorter at 532. There's some that are longer up in the 1500 level. So again, it depends on the application, how the wavelength is utilized. This year at ILMF, we're going to have a couple talks about more advanced sensor topics like the wavelength and how to manipulate wavelength, or scan patterns, how different scan patterns can affect the data acquisition process, and in some cases can yield more complete and more identifiable objects, if you will. So there's a lot of and you add to the miniaturization of these systems to support automotive functions. And so we're seeing an explosion of all different types of sensors using all different types of technologies, whether it's wavelength manipulation or, like I said, the scan pattern. In some cases, it's a different type of LiDAR. There's a new one called frequency modulated continuous wave LiDAR, which is helpful because it can help track inbound objects and provide a speed of those inbound objects. So that's obviously very helpful for autonomous navigation. So overall, we're just seeing the roof come off the market in terms of the different approaches and technologies and with LiDAR sensors. So it's an exciting time to be in the industry, and for me, it's just exciting to see how this stuff is being, how it's evolved and how it's being applied commercially now.
So you mentioned that you touched on the platforms, such as autonomous vehicles, but are drones also a big mix in terms of an emerging platform for LiDAR technology too?
Yes, absolutely. Drones for sure. Obviously, that's a very much of a cost standpoint. And I come out of the airborne mapping industry, where we put two people in an aircraft and went and flew all day. And that one of course, was the pilot, and the other person in general was the flight operator. So being able to replace those two people in the air with a drone and a sensor and do similar activities is huge, not only from a cost standpoint, from a safety standpoint. Drones can give you some different advantages over a fixed wing aircraft or a helicopter that are notable, i.e., mainly the ability to navigate above and below the canopy and the terrain, to deal with the terrain as well as to go above and below canopy if there's vegetation or trees or any of that stuff. Drones can kind of go under it, where, of course, manned aircraft cannot. So, but while I say drones are unpopular, literally any platform where you can strap a LiDAR unit, a shopping cart, a truck, a trolley, a cart, any type of wheeled vehicle, any type of airborne vehicle, even some submarine vehicles are being used. I really am kind of agnostic about the platform. Drones are of course popular, and certainly we're seeing a big push there. But put a LiDAR sensor on a little wheeled vehicle and push it through a small pipe, something like that. So there's no end. There's no end in sight in terms of the applications and the different types of configurations and approaches you can put together.
Well, that's interesting to hear. But my background has mostly been in satellite and aerial imagery as it relates to radar, IR, and EO. But getting into LiDAR has always been there's been a lot of barriers to entry there in terms of either the platform or the sensor restrictions. But now that the aperture is significantly opening up, I'm even noticing the higher demand for open data just to figure out how to even use it, just to play around with it, to get an idea of how to get started with machine learning algorithms or things like that. Right. Just because there's a high interest in it and the barrier to entry is so low now.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point, which is, I always tell people that are interested in jumping into LiDAR or doing LiDAR, quote unquote. They say, hey, what do I need? What do I need to know? And I said, well, the first thing you need to know is how to process the data, because once it starts coming in, it's going to come in like, water from a fire hose. And so unless you have a strong capability to process it and exploit it and to understand how to exploit it efficiently, it's going to be a long, tough, hard slog because LiDAR is very, very difficult. You're talking about a completely random point cloud structure. So there's no way, with a raster image, you can, you got rows and columns. With point clouds, it's XYZ, it's in every direction and can take every shape. So processing it is very difficult. And the advanced technologies you mentioned, like AI, machine learning, deep learning, those types of tools are just starting to come into the fore. For the most part, our industry, especially on the commercial side, has been kind of in this kind of, I guess what you'd call a siloed data delivery approach, which is, hey, we're going to go collect, Montgomery County, and we're going to collect all that data. We're going to give Montgomery County all the data and all their deliverables. So they'll have all the point cloud, and they'll have all the topo, meaning the contours, and those might be in different file formats. They'll have all this imagery, and they'll have all these other types of data products, like a terrain model, a digital elevation model, all this other stuff. So we hand them all this data, and they go, oh, great. And while it's useful and it's what they ordered, it's hard to exploit LiDAR data, especially the source point cloud data. So there's a lot of new technologies coming along online, and a lot of those are cloud-based technologies that are allowing users to not just access the data, but to exploit it, to run processes in the cloud against those data sets and create derivatives. That's incredible. I mean, that to me is the next step of basically computing in our industry, because we're making the data available to people who can leverage it and use it for their needs without forcing them to, have 800 billion terabytes of data storage. We're sharing it more effectively, and that means we're going to be able to exploit it more effectively. So, in fact, I just found out today or yesterday, I think was announced that there's a group up in Boulder, Colorado, which is near me. I'm based in Denver, called OpenTopography. And they have an online cloud-based system for all sorts of data, including point cloud data. So all of the USGS 3DEP, which is the 3D elevation program, which covers about 2/3 of the United States, all of that data will be available through OpenTopography.
I think they announced that they just moved all that data into Amazon Web Services as well, right? Is that the same program?
That's right. So now you can either hit Amazon AWS, or you can go to OpenTopography. And like I said, you can either log in, you can create some, I think they've got an API you can even, connect into. And then from that, you could run a process to say, hey, I'm looking for, very complex, what I would say very complex computationally complex processes against the LiDAR data. Let's say you're looking for some type of a forestry student or researcher might say, hey, I'm really interested in this under this mid-level canopy and I want to research it. So I'm gonna run some processes against that data, and I'm gonna out pops a result. So that's really powerful to look at, national level type of trends and processes happening. So I'm super excited about that. I mean, like I said, the hardware's been cool for a long time, but now the processing's catching up, and that's that's where the bang for our buck is going to be. Because once we start applying machine learning and deep learning to those types of things, where it can help us do feature extraction and other tedious tasks and do it well, it's gonna blow the door off this industry. It's just gonna explode. I don't see any other way. I mean,
well,
I'm excited about it. That's great.
With how how the LiDAR industry has grown significantly, where would you say the biggest, we'll call it, hurdles or bumps to overcome the industry has to still recognize, or they're still figuring out?
Well, I think some of it's the technology adoption. In 2006, when I started working with it and looking at it and working with a firm that was heavily involved, everything was difficult. We had to build our own software products to process the data. We had to figure out how to store and efficiently utilize hardware networks because we had limited space. We had a lot of data in limited space. So, areas where I see it really exploding are pretty much on the areas that are not the early adopters. I mean, we've seen it in terms of the terrain, the development of terrain, but where I see a lot of increase in the utilization is in the architecture, engineering, and construction space, the AEC space. Construction in that space has traditionally kind of been not a high-tech area. That's changing rapidly because people want to see how their buildings are being built. They want to document as they're being built, and they want to measure and capture everything properly so that when they are building it, they know that it's being built properly and that they won't run into run into delays later down the line with problems in terms of, like setting a facade or doing some real very high precision work in terms of could be joining buildings or not joining, but, crossing supports. So any way which LiDAR is being used to document those situations. And so,
so it's funny you say, because you being in Colorado, I've actually had the pleasure to talk with several companies out there in the last year regarding how geospatial technology that's typically used for defense, and even LiDAR included, is starting to be applied to normal geological surveys or topography before construction happens, even for an entire subdivision, for example, to measure the settling problems. Actually, the settling problems are huge in Colorado Springs right now, and people are concerned about that kind of thing. So they're trying to employ more technologies. And do you get a sense that there's some tension between traditional tradecraft of ground survey teams and some of these companies working on these newer technologies in terms of their accuracy or comparing to which? Or do you feel that they are more complementing each other?
I think they're getting better at complementing each other. I think the technology adoption, especially from the traditional surveying side, has been slow, just because those guys are slow to move typically. And I faced that, head on before, in one of my previous jobs. I was working with some folks that didn't appreciate the value of doing laser scanning and other types of 3D data capture. So it was really helpful for me to explain how we could implement those technologies to help save time or money or to fix problem issues that we hadn't identified previously. So it's just I think the technology, especially LiDAR, scares people just because the volume of data as well as the complexity of processing and exploiting it. I think that's been, and it is a scary thing. And then you end up with a lot of data and you've got to put it somewhere. So the other problem becomes, where do you put it and how do you share it and serve it? And so again, the cloud and some of those solutions are really helping out with the data dissemination issue of, I can sell the data. A great example was 5-10 years ago, I would literally have several external hard drives full of LiDAR data and other type of derivative data. I would hand them over, literally physically hand them to our client, which was a utility. And that utility would then take that data and they would do a number of different processes. They would do a number of analysis processes over their own network, which was what they were paying us for. So we gave them the data, they did their work and went on their own way. They were complaining to me about how expensive the data was. And I said, you're exactly right. It's very expensive data because we had to go out and collect it with a helicopter. We had to process it and it took us forever. And we have to deliver it to you. And my message to them was, if you can figure out a way to use it across 5 or 6 or 7 different departments rather than just one, then that data investment's going to look a lot better. But I think it's not only a technology adoption issue, but it's a data management issue of older kind of quote unquote traditional companies, organizations like a utility, electric utility, are not used to dealing with massive volumes of data. And so that's been a sea change for them of not only how to handle it, the data, but how to share it and serve it and utilize it once they've paid for it. You know, I've talked to many CEOs from utilities and they say, this stuff is so expensive. Why are we paying for it? And I said, you need to figure out how to exploit it better, because it's not really we were giving them what they had asked for. The problem was they didn't know what they had asked for and really how to exploit it and how to.
I feel like in the satellite industry, it's almost the opposite problem, where companies know they have the data management strategy is there. They know they want lots of data. They know they want to look at change over time.
Yeah.
Now it's a matter of, it's getting there, but even the satellite providers themselves, Maxar is a little bit doing pretty good, or Airbus is starting to head that direction. But but the radar, the satellite providers themselves are having a hard time understanding the business model behind providing lots of data rather than one-off images, for example.
Right.
Lots of data for machine learning purposes, lots of data for change detection. I don't want to just have a one-off coverage of an entire state. I'm trying to monitor this over days, for example.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Planet subscription has the right business model for that type of thing, but it's recognizing that, hey, I can't. My customers, if I want a radar image right now, they're going to charge me $5,000 for a new collect and an archive collect, but I need 20 images over the course of a month just to figure out the change detection, and that's all of a sudden over $100,000.
Right.
So.
And you mentioned a great point about the satellite firms. We're seeing, I think, one of the reasons, or one of the folks we're having do a keynote is a woman named Tara O'Shea from Planet Labs, and she's going to be talking about how she's in charge. She's in fact their director of forest programs. So not only are they helping to monitor deforestation and other types of issues like that across the globe, but they're also interested in understanding and exploiting and analyzing using these amazing group of sensors that we have. And so what they're trying to do is integrate airborne LiDAR to kind of quote unquote with their imagery products to quote unquote see underneath the trees. Of course, from a satellite image, they can only see the tops of the trees. The LiDAR underneath and the terrain below gives them additional information that's quite valuable. And that can be used for analysis for other things of, hey, if this area, we get 10 square kilometers deforested in this certain area, how is it going to change the drainage patterns in this area? And how is that runoff going to affect the downstream residents along that river or along that stream or whatever it is? So there's a lot of really interesting things that can be exploited from merging space-based platforms with airborne or kind of terrestrial platforms. So that I think you bring up a great point. There's all these industries are changing so fast, and I see kind of Planet Labs being out in front of most satellite firms and understanding it's more about selling the value of the data rather than just the data.
Exactly.
Exploiting the intelligence from the image, not just selling you an image.
Now, a single image is going to expire very quickly.
Right. And, absolutely. Yeah. It's almost instantly stale. It is instantly stale. There's no other way about it. I mean, Maxar has great products. They have great satellites up in space. They make great products.
And it's not to say that folks like Maxar and Airbus aren't innovating. They are. It's
sure.
Just I've just noticed that when it comes to purchasing imagery itself, they're still working on their business models because They're a lot older companies.
Well, and I think they recognize also, especially Maxar, which is in mine, it's just up the street for me. they've got to figure out how to generate more commercial revenue, because the bulk of the revenue is now from, a check from Uncle Sam.
Which may or may not be there in another year or two based off of the competition out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Well, there's a lot of competition. There's certainly some equipment and optics up in space that we're not aware of. But that market's changing rapidly, and I know for a fact that's one of their focuses is how do we generate more commercial revenue? How do we adopt more of a Planet Labs approach? I
think that goes into their first, their next batch of 6 satellites with their Legion constellation going up next year.
Right.
That's supposed to be more nano sats or small sats, either way. But they're taking more of a newer startup approach to the satellite industry because you can't afford these $2 billion big boys anymore to justify the cost.
Absolutely. And the revisit, if you can, the frequency of revisit is a big deal. I know previously there had been some small sat firms that were doing like video and stuff like that from space, but that's, of course, that's maybe good for 5 or 6 seconds. But yeah, we're excited. Like I said, we're excited to have the Planet Lab folks join us because at ILMF, because at GeoWeek, I should say, because it's not only about LiDAR, the integration of LiDAR, but it's also about the remote sensing audience that we'll have there too, which will be quite significant. So it's really, I hate to say it as a geography nerd, it's a really exciting time to be in this business. And, you can always say that. So we're definitely enjoying the fun times we're experiencing.
So what maybe this is a little bit ahead of the game. Maybe you're a little bit biased because you are a conference chair, but in terms of technologies or interesting emerging companies to keep an eye on at the conference, do you have any hints?
Shoot, there's a lot. There is a number. One of the areas I'm especially interested in, I've always been interested in, is kind of more of mobile data collection, LiDAR from like I talked before, from a backpack, from a helmet, from a handheld, obviously from a small drone. Those platforms are really starting to pick up. So we're seeing a lot of more quote unquote wearable technology, where I think our market's going to change. I think we're going to move from what I call a transactional approach, which is, hey, Adam, I'm going to hire you and you're going to come in here and you're going to capture my plant, for example. And I bought this new plant. I want to see what's in there. I want to have everything captured and measured so I can do my design work. Okay, great. I come in there and capture the data. You write me a check for $10K or whatever, and I give you a bunch of data and I walk away and you walk away and we go our separate ways. I think it's becoming, that used to be the old model. I think the new model is, especially for commercial organizations, where there's, for example, like a fabrication plant. A couple of years ago, I talked to the folks in Intel at one of their chip fabrication plants in, I think it was Arizona somewhere. And the guy who was running the plant was saying, we're moving equipment and adding equipment and adding new pipes and wires all over this plant on a daily basis. And I need to capture all these new things on a daily basis. So he was talking about having people wear scanners on top of their helmets, where the scanners would be smart enough to walk through a facility and say, I see that's been here before. That's been here before. Oh, there's a new pipe. I need to scan that and then send that data to whoever to get it updated into the main model. So going from a transactional, which is do this little piece, to a continuous scanning environment, I think is something that's going to revolutionize the not only the commercial industry, potentially the AEC industry and many other industries, because again, I don't have to wait to do it. I'm actively adding in and having kind of an active change detection approach within my business. And that can pay a lot of dividends. So there's a lot of groups at ILMF that have wearables and a lot of handhelds, backpacks. I know Leica has one, a backpack. You'll have to forgive me. I can't remember all these names and models and those types of things. The other interesting technology that's going to be at ILMF, which I'm quite anxious to hear some talks about, is using LiDAR in two ways. One, for autonomous navigation, and the other would be, so you have a small drone, You have a LiDAR system attached to that drone. The LiDAR system is being used in two ways. One is to navigate the drone around a space where there may not be any GPS signal, or maybe in a closed environment like a tunnel or an underground environment. So they're using the LiDAR to navigate around, and they're also using the LiDAR to actually map the area and map the room or the whatever enclosure they're in. So there's some interesting talks about that in terms of, how do you map a dangerous situation? It could be the inside of a nuclear reactor. It could be the inside of a mining operation. So those are interesting.
That was one use case that I heard brought up last year when I was talking to these geological surveys. Was this not just they're trying to send drones into drainage ditches to figure out where there's been leakages based off of the settling of the entire pipe system underground these communities. But that also sounds like an excellent use case for LiDAR, since you don't have to necessarily rely on somebody's eyes on the camera. It just goes in, scans the entire thing over and over again, and figures out what's changed over time. Yeah,
and I say this as a drone, a certified FAA certified drone pilot.
I might be getting there myself soon.
Humans are terrible pilots. It's been proven time and time again. We're horrible, horrible pilots. Yep. I would much rather have the computer do the work, because they're much quicker to respond, and more likely to respond in the right way. So I'm all for these autonomous technologies, and even DJI. I think I'm sorry. FLIR is one of the partners with DJI, the Chinese drone manufacturer, has come up with a similar system. It's not autonomous, but it would allow an operator like a public safety emergency response person to put a drone inside a facility or a building, let's say like a chemical plant explosion. The drone could be sent in to monitor different levels of gases, whether it's CO2 or methane or other types of things, sulfuric dioxide, I think, was one of the ones they can sense.
That sounds right.
I can't remember. There was something like 8 or 10 of those. So to me, that's another type of remote sensing. It's just not optical. It's whatever.
No, actually, it's a pretty good point. I mean, I'm aware of more optical use cases for LiDAR, but
right.
So LiDAR is able to detect more chemical emissions as well.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I don't want to be confusing there. It cannot. LiDAR cannot.
Okay. Well, obviously there's chemical and gases in the light spectrum that visible in the light spectrum that I can't see with my visible eyes. So I just assume maybe that was on the edges of things.
Well, no, and I'm sorry to confuse the two. That's my fault there. But
I'm familiar with what NASA's doing with some of the emissions detection, CO2 emissions, and what's the other big couple of the greenhouse gases coming out from various companies that they're monitoring. Methane.
Typically, though, it's somewhat what I would call a sniffer technology. Although there are certain types of LiDAR, more of the super long range or atmospheric LiDAR, that can do things like identify particulates in the air, and they're generally those LiDAR systems are pointed from the ground up through the air column, so they can do different measurements through the wind column, or like measuring wind speed, at 28,000 feet or something like that, and also looking at particulates, smog, and one thing like it can like track like a particulate from a volcano explosion or something like that. That's of course something that's quite important to track in our atmosphere. So you did mention NASA, so I want to give a plug for one of our keynote speakers, who's going to be a guy named Michael Zanetti. He is using LiDAR, and NASA is using LiDAR in preparation. They're planning to use LiDAR, I should say, for the 2024 mission that is a moonshot. So they're going to go back. We're going back to the moon, and this time we're going to land on the South Pole. And so because we're landing on the pole, there's a lot of what he calls illumination issues. To put it nicely, it's dark a lot. So LiDAR is going to be utilized there for some autonomous navigation and some other purposes. Mike's a planetary exploration scientist, so his job is to help NASA understand how to move, vehicles and how to navigate around in these different environments that they'll face, not only on the moon, but really this moon mission is in preparation for their, the moon, or I'm sorry, the Mars manned Mars mission that's planned for, I don't know when that's planned for, but they're moving toward that. And this is one of the steps so he's going to be coming and talking about how NASA uses LiDAR. And, honestly, they were one of the main reasons LiDAR was ever created. So we're excited. I mean, that's really super fun. And then at ILMF on Tuesday, we're thrilled to have Jack Dangerman, who's the CEO of Esri, and everybody knows Esri software. So he's going to be joining us for a talk on Tuesday morning, and then that'll be followed by a keynote panel where we're going to have a number of different
I was shocked to see you guys had Jack on the list, just because, he was just out here in DC, and you're starting to see him at a lot less conferences these days. So.
Yeah, a lot less. I mean, he does his shows. He'll support his shows. He very rarely goes to anybody else's, and I don't blame him. He's, he works so hard. I can't ever get over it.
No, he's deserved a few days off for some leniency in terms of what he's able to choose.
Oh, he's unbelievable. I got linked in on an email chain with him a couple of weeks ago, and he was sending out an email to us at 11:30 at night on Super Bowl, the night after the Super Bowl night, from California. And I thought, geez, that's why the guy's been successful. He never stops working.
He doesn't sleep.
Jeez Louise. I couldn't believe it. You're thinking, God, this guy's a billionaire. Well, he doesn't need to work.
Must be a California thing. A lot of this.
God. I was like, go to bed. I was like, man, but we're excited to have him. And then, so basically we'll have basically 2 full days, Tuesday and Wednesday at ILMF will be full conference days. We're going to have all sorts of different sessions. Some will be involving one emerging area for us is topobathymetric. So these are kind of dual scanners. In most cases, they're two different, a scanner that has a couple different scanners in it. And one measures the earth and the ground, and the other one measures the water column and can measure through the water column. So what we're interested, of course, because of climate change, is that interface between the land and the water, because that is either in some cases quickly eroding, in other cases it's being built up. But it's important for us as scientists and for our nation, especially to manage our natural resources, to use these new topobathymetric lasers.
So where would your initial application of that be? It would be like shorelines or
lakes, absolutely. Any coastal area, literally any coastal area, because, for example, Hurricane George comes through Florida and hits, I don't know, Tallahassee, or not Tallahassee's, no, that's a terrible example, but Apalachicola, right? And suddenly the beach it's been modified because Hurricane George has come through there and moved stuff. And some of those things, typically what gets moved first is the flood line in the floodplain and the flood zone. So that needs to be remapped. So climate change is a huge driver to this stuff. There's no two ways about it. And then we have other sessions on, like we have a session on extreme project environments, and those where we're doing LiDAR data collection projects. There's a couple examples from Alaska, where it's really tough to fly and collect. You don't get a lot of clear days up there. And then there's some other examples. We'll have, I'm really excited. We have an example, a really nice talk from a gentleman from Major League Baseball. And he's going to be talking to us about how Major League Baseball is utilizing LiDAR. So
just to monitor the behaviors of the ball, the players, what exactly?
Well, it has to do more with the physical nature of the parks, but I'm going to leave most of the content.
Sounds good. A little teaser for folks that come to the conference.
Yeah, there's a million ways you can use it. Obviously, the first one I chatted with him about was the ball and strike issue. And he said, that's not something we can talk about. And I said, that's fine.
You're not the first one. I know there's companies contracted to monitor the games, and if they utilize certain technologies, they literally can't show certain aspects of how things are done. Especially if you learning approach.
Yeah, and we'll have a session on transportation projects. We'll have a session on advanced computing approaches, different storage methodologies, different exploitation methodologies, like I mentioned before. We have a session on UAS and LiDAR, people using drones to collect LiDAR for different purposes. So we've got a really, I think, a very nice and balanced program. There's a lot of content focused toward the government side and the USGS as well, in terms of the 3DEP program. Again, that's the 3D elevation program for the nation. Typically referred to as elevation for the nation. So like I said, we're about 2/3 done for the nation. We have another third to go. So there's a lot of work, a lot of data to be collected still.
Well, with a lot of sessions there and the industry obviously growing, like we've continuously said, what is the ILMF doing in terms of educational outreach to folks, not just wanting to get involved with LiDAR, but also increasing the personnel trained and, well, we'll call it just, raising how many, what's the word I'm looking for?
The knowledge, raising the knowledge.
Well, the knowledge base, but the lack of, there's the geospatial industry is exploding. And there's also a lack of tradecraft personnel. We got to train them up from the ground up, not just from the college level, but maybe even from the high school standpoint. So do you guys have you all thought about training seminars, or is there stuff that outreach initiatives like that too?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I agree with you. Traditionally, LiDAR's been a topic that has not been taught or presented in academic environments, just mainly because it's so new. That's changing. We're seeing some, obviously, there's a number of different academic programs that will be represented at ILMF. One, I can, off the top of my head, Penn State is one that has some online programs, not only for GIS, but for remote sensing and for LiDAR. So they offer some really good offerings. So we're seeing more from the academic side, which is great. Obviously, there's other tools out. If I tell people, go out to YouTube. If you want to figure out how to do anything, go to YouTube. There's videos about it. So there's a lot of videos about LiDAR and LiDAR data processing out there. There's a number of open source tools and tools that are a little bit easier and a little bit more cost friendly that can be utilized. One of those is called LAS tools. And that's, it's a good way to start to learn about LiDAR. The other thing that's being offered at ILMF is from ASPRS. Again, they're one of our partners. They'll offer on Monday, March 23rd, they're offering a full day. I think they're having something like 6 or 8 workshops in the morning and 6 or 8 workshops in the afternoon. These are all paid sessions, so you have to pay for them. But they cover a bunch of different topics. One of those is LiDAR. One of those is UAVs, how to collect imagery right, how to understand about spatial accuracy and vertical accuracy when you start talking about data products. So I encourage people to go out to the website, lidarforum.org. And on that webpage, you'll see a drop down for workshops, and you can see and register for those out there. So we offer a lot of educational experiences for that. And so, the other thing I think is valuable at our shows is just to be able to network and talk to other people who are doing similar activities, because no one has the right solution. No one has the perfect solution. We're all just trying to, cobble together something that works for us. So, there's just it's a great community where if you ask people, they'll usually tell you. There's not a lot of, there is some competitiveness and some IP protection going on, but in most cases, people are willing to share their thoughts and ideas and perspectives. And I think that's what makes ILMF kind of a special show, is that it's a community that's very much focused on LiDAR, and everybody's really willing to help and share and make everybody smarter. And I think that's a really testament to our community.
Awesome. Well, I got maybe one or two last questions for you.
Sure.
First off, is the conference, does it usually get held in DC, or is it alternate?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. Having it in DC is a little bit unusual for us. So that's going to happen this year in 2020. For the most, I think the majority of the time ILMF's history, it has been in Denver, Colorado, where I'm based. So this year it's in 20, it'll be in DC in 2021, and in 2022, it'll be back in Denver, Colorado. Those dates have yet to be finalized for next year, I think. but we'll make those announcements at the show in DC.
Is there any other locations that you're hoping to grow into just because of the expansion of the interest?
Yeah, I think we're looking at some different spots. I think it might be a little bit above my pay grade, but
Understood.
But I think we keep our ears open. I mean, going to DC is very much strategic for us, of course, because that's where a lot of the funding from this industry comes from. So we want to make sure we're serving that community as well as the commercial community.
I'm only asking for my St. Louis brethren out there who've been
sure. No,
exploding out there.
We love St. Louis, and I know obviously USGS is moving a lot of people there. So
awesome. Let's see. Last question. Is there anything else you'd like to plug about the conference that you think is worth mentioning to perhaps to government folks who've never been to the conference before, but they've been to something like GeoInt? What would you say to them is a huge attractor for you?
Well, for me, what I'm seeing a lot is just a lot of GIS. People have traditionally been in kind of the geospatial GIS domain. Now they're starting to get exposed to LiDAR more frequently. So I think for them, it's really ILMF presents an opportunity to really kind of catch up and see the latest and the greatest, as well as, like you mentioned before, have some, get up to hopefully use some. Take advantage of some of those educational opportunities to get up to speed on different topics, and really just to get to know the industry better. LiDAR has always been kind of off to the side, kind of a specialty niche-y kind of a thing. And so I think it's becoming a lot more mainstream. I'm convinced it will. It's just a better mousetrap, right, for a lot of different tools. So, and to me, it's almost an inevitability. So I think the real opportunity is for people just to kind of get to see it and get to see all the new sexy stuff. And then also the other thing would be some of the data visualization, I think, is really coming on strong. And that's traditionally been lacking in our industry. We've been really good at collecting data, but now we're getting better at processing it effectively, like I mentioned with the cloud, and visualizing it much more effectively, whether it's through HoloLens or 3D and AR, VR type of technologies. But that had traditionally been the biggest challenge is I've got a lot of data, I just can't share it because I don't have the computers to do it. So to me, that's one of the most exciting things. It's just the data viz piece, but there'll be plenty of content there for, I think, a wide variety of attendees, and certainly a great place to get your laser scanning nerd on.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for joining us on the show. This is Bill Emison with the International LiDAR Mapping Forum, which once again takes place March 23rd through 25th at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center in downtown DC.
Yep.
We'll be there on site. We can't wait to check it out for the first time. Hopefully, we'll definitely bring back some news and learn something, bring it back for the rest of the community. With that said, I'm Adam Simmons of Project Geospatial. Thanks, everyone.